Industries Committee to order. Have three bills on our agenda today, all three brought by Senator Rahman of the 5th District. Senator, you have several bills that all deal with marijuana, both retail sales, recreational use, and the medical marijuana aspects. I have put them just in order that I thought made sense. I want to give you time to speak to each of them today. I've told you that I feel like any senator filing a bill has a chance to be heard and present their case. It has really been a couple of years since we've heard medical marijuana issues in this committee. There were changes last year that went through the Health Committee, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to make your case. I've explained to you and the committee this will be a hearing only. We will not be taking a vote today, but I wanted to give you a chance to explain what you're trying to accomplish with this legislation. I think it's probably the most logical way is for you to go in the order we have them. I want you to discuss Senate Bill 263 first. That's your Georgia Retail Marijuana Code, because I think that gets to the core issue or the end game of all these marijuana bills that we've been looking at over the years. And then let's hear what the public has to say about this. Committee members may have questions as well. Once you complete that one, I'm going to let you just talk about all of them or whatever you think we need to know. All committee members have in their folders the Senate Research Office summaries of your bills and hard copies of the bills themselves. You're free to go in as much detail as you feel like it's necessary to educate us what these bills provide for and your rationale for it, the public demand for it, or however you want to present these bills to the committee. It is easiest, we find, for the public to hear what you have to say if you present from the podium there, because we have a podium mic that's wired through the web system, and you'll be able to be heard freely. So if you will, with that, start with Senate Bill 263. It's titled the Georgia Retail Marijuana Code, and describe what that bill does.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to present the bill that we have and before you, SB 263. You are right that it's been there for a couple of years. I was kind of surprised when I got the email that you want to hear the bill, so I appreciate it. Well, to you and the committee that you were ready to listen to me what I have to say, but I'm going to make it short. This bill, what SB 260 does, is really, this was legalize the sales of retail marijuana throughout the licensed establishment. That's what they're going to do. It would impose an excise tax that would be constitutionally earmarked to be split between the education and the transportation infrastructure. This bill has all this mechanism how we can do it all, but that's the bottom line. This bill really would coexist with, but we're not going to replace any medical marijuana bill that we had or we're talking about. And the facility that we're going to have, basically, that could be a dual license for retail and medical. This is not going to establish anything separate than what, if somebody has a medical license establishment. And this would also cover the products such as edibles that we don't have. Some of the state may have the THC or, oil for the medicinal purposes, but doesn't have edibles. And that's what these bills can does. Now, currently, we have probably, I think, around, as of last year, I think there's the states that has reported that, around $10 billion just a tax revenue for the 18 some states that have some kind of illegal, way to adult uses of cannabis sales. So
hold on, I missed that number.
It's a $10 billion, $10.4 billion.
Is that
tax
sales
revenue?
So tax revenues currently are $10.4 billion nationally?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't know, how much, this is the tax was reported basically.
How many states are we talking about where the retail sales of recreational marijuana are permitted?
Right now, 11 states have adult usage stores. They have altogether around some forms around 18 states.
So they're getting about $1 billion each in
Billion
tax
each.
revenue?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Around $1 billion each.
Sorry to interrupt you. I
No,
just
that's fine.
Didn't understand the numbers.
And mostly right now, the single most valuable corp right now in like Alaska, Colorado, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Oregon. These are some of the states basically right now that are the most of crop there. They have it, and 11 state actually has operating stores, and they have license support around 13,000 farms too, basically. So this is if you look at it in terms of economic issue, in terms of revenue that can generate for the transportation, for education, I think is huge, especially if you look at some of the study that we have right now, that it's not necessarily an impact of economy, in terms of health too. Marijuana regulation is not associated with an increase in hard drug use, basically. That's the study shows. It's the criminal activities, unsafety in workplace, and illegal use of marijuana by teens. These are the things that if you look at the state that legalize, the study shows that this negative impact is really low. And there's also some correlation between that, what do you call those opioid uses too. And most of the state that has legalized marijuana, the opioid uses is really substantially lower than some of the state doesn't, currently has legalized marijuana, basically. And also, this doesn't really associate with any adverse effect, in terms of workplace. The study result really actually show declining workers' compensation benefit too, which corresponds almost 20% reduction in workman comp income that state that legalize marijuana for recreational use. That's according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. So if you have any more questions, but this is basically the crux of the,
I've got a couple, and our vice chairman may have some as well. So what is the tax rate that you propose we tax the sale of retail marijuana at? Just our 4% sales tax rate, or is there another percentage? As you know, cigarettes are taxed much higher than other goods and services. I'm curious as to what your
definitely
rate
can
would be.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great question. It's definitely, we have to look at it, the other state. That's the commission who's going to decide. This is not up to me to decide what should be. We have to look at the other state, how much their tax revenue is, and we have to make that based on, rest of the country.
Have you done that research to see what other states, what tax rates they may have?
I did not. But that's a good question.
Now, you set up here a issuing authority, the licenses that will be needed to sell retail marijuana. You leave that to the state revenue commissioner?
That's correct.
Okay. And what are the qualifications for obtaining a license to sell retail marijuana?
Well, this commission is going to decide exactly this, specific. I don't have anything in front of me that I can, can tell you right away, but definitely has to follow what the other states are doing. We have to make sure that there's a legalized business that have a license by the commission, by the state. They have to go through all the, background checks and everything else, all the guardrail that you can put it in, in terms of this is not something that we will be selling in a convenience store or any of the smoke shops or anything like that. So this will be highly regulated based whatever the Department of Revenue or the Commission decide.
And in this highly regulated license, you're recommending here would be a pretty minimal fee, just $5,000 to obtain a retail license.
That should be decided basically, the Commission will decide exactly what we want to do eventually if it ever passed.
Okay, so we should ignore the terms of your bill that say $5,000, let the Commission determine that?
We can do that.
And did I understand you to say that there is no correlation between other drug use and the use of marijuana, that is just nothing to that?
I'm sorry, if you could repeat the question.
I thought I heard you say something to the effect that marijuana was not a gateway drug and it did not lead to the use of other type of illegal drugs. Did you recite that in your comments?
What I said is that does not really, legalizing marijuana is not going to increase the other drugs usage. That really is, in some cases, if you look at some of the state in terms of opiate usage or something like that, they're probably a little down.
Okay. So opiate usage goes down in states that legalize recreational marijuana?
Some of the studies says it's really a little lower. That's correct.
Have those states experienced any other negative impacts as far as, perhaps drivers under the influence of marijuana or other negative impacts on society?
It's minimal.
Yeah.
It's a little lower, basically.
All right, I have a few other questions, other committee members that are asking some questions. I'll recognize first the Vice Chairman, Senator Brass. Chairman Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ramon, you've mentioned or referred to the study a couple of times. Is there any way we can get a copy of that study, or you can kind of send me?
Definitely.
Yeah, if you don't mind
Definitely
doing that'd be great.
What's the title of that study? I missed that in my notes as well.
Well, there's a study by Marijuana Project, Policy Project, Cannabis Tax Revenue, and the state regulated cannabis for adult use. So I have a couple of, and then there's another studies basically of Leafy Whitney Economics 2021 Leafy Cannabis Harvest Report. So I can send some of this report to you all.
If you would give those to Cindy West, my administrative assistant, we'll have them available for other committee members in the future. Senator Brass,
Sure.
continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And then, Senator, also, you keep referring to the commission. Is that the same thing as the state licensing authority?
That's correct.
Okay.
So,
And so, who makes up that licensing authority? I think in line 121, you're kind of going through the purpose of it, and maybe I'm missing it. I can't find who's going to make up this licensing authority. Will that be, I know on the Medical Marijuana Commission, it was appointments by the Lieutenant Governor, the Speaker, and the Governor. Is that kind of how you got it drafted, or is it in the bill, or? I'm just trying to get my head around that, and I may be missing it. So,
I think it's going to be the Department of Revenue commissioners.
So the Department of Revenue appoints the commissioners to this commission, to the state licensing authority.
State licensing authority. Yes.
Okay. All right. That's no further questions for now, Chairman.
Senator Albers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for your hard work. Are you familiar with some of the challenges that have come out of other states that have legalized marijuana?
Yeah, there definitely going to be something of this magnitude. Bill, there definitely going to be some challenges, no doubt about that.
Certainly, and are you aware, from both a public safety perspective as well as public health, that they have in those states increased a much higher level of addiction, mental illness, violence, crime, traffic deaths, and social problems?
I haven't seen any study that really that I can think of.
I haven't had a chance to study it.
I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, if I just have a couple more questions,
right
I
ahead.
appreciate it. Thank you. The concern, I think if you would offline meet with our Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police and sheriffs and other law enforcement agencies, we've spent a lot of time talking to folks in Colorado and some of those other states and seeing what damage that has caused in many cases. I would encourage you to spend maybe a little time with them to see what we've learned and where their position might be on taking this step forward. Some of the other things that we noted when we talked to officials in Colorado specifically was the dramatic increase in homelessness, as well as cash and money laundering being used at dispensaries. So I would ask if you would please indulge myself by understanding the ramification from a public safety and public health perspective.
Definitely, I'd be glad to do that.
Recognize Senator Kennedy for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this so that we can vet this and talk about this. There was one comment you made, and Chairman Cowsert alluded to it. I thought I understood you to say that opiate use had gone down in states where marijuana had been legalized. And my question is, are you referring to legal opiates such as prescription drug use has gone down in states where marijuana is available, or is it the illegal opiate use and drug abuse has gone down where states have legalized marijuana?
Senator, I have to look at the study. I can get back with you. I think this is, when I talk about went down, it's like 0.18%. It's really not that big of a difference. It just did not really increase the usage. But I have to get back with you exactly if it was like a prescription or not.
Okay, that's fine. And Senator, the source of that data that you're referring to, is that the same study that Chairman Brass was asking about, that you said you'll get those details for us?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other committee members with questions on Senate Bill 263? It occurs to me that this bill makes no sense unless you have first legalized marijuana. You don't address the criminal code sections, et cetera, in 263, so that kind of presumes that you have first decriminalized it. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
This bill does not address the criminal penalties for possession of marijuana. It would be relatively silly for somebody to pay $5,000 to sell an illegal product. That's not in this bill, so I guess you would not really want this bill considered unless marijuana was decriminalized?
Definitely.
Okay. And is that kind of what you're getting at in that state Senate Resolution 165?
That's correct. I want people to decide, not really, you can't just, we cannot just do that. We have to have a constitution amendment. We have to, 165, we want to put in the ballot. Let the citizens of Georgia decide what they want to do, basically. It's not necessarily up to us. And
Why don't you go ahead and speak to that now, and then we'll have some speakers come. Some public input on Senate Resolution 165. That's your state constitutional amendment to legalize the use of marijuana and prohibit taxes on medical marijuana. Can you sort of walk us through that, what you're proposing?
Well, what SR 65 does really, this is just, this resolution really would propose an amendment to the Constitution to allow retail use of marijuana by people 21 or older.
Is that required, is that a constitutional provision or just a change in the criminal code you're looking to do? Does it require a constitutional amendment?
That's going to require in the code.
Okay.
Going to require the Constitution, ballot measure that will going to be,
Well,
going to be.
I mean,
You know, what I want to do is, in simple terms, let people decide. We put in a ballot and let citizens of Georgia decide whether they want to allow people of 21 age or older can, buy a retail marijuana. It will allow anyone with conviction that would legal under the law. It will allow anyone with marijuana conviction that would be legal under the new law to petition and have their conviction expunged, after 2024, I believe that's what it is. The ballot question should say, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended, pretty much so as to authorize the General Assembly to provide by general law for the legalization and regulation of the production, sale, and personal use of individual 21 years of age or older of marijuana, provide for taxes for such production and sale of educational programs and purposes, and capital outlay projects for transportation infrastructure purposes within the state, to exempt from taxation marijuana used for medical purposes, and to provide a procedure to vacate previous misdemeanor marijuana conviction. This should be the ballot questions.
So anybody who has a marijuana conviction on their record prior to the constitutional amendment could go petition the court to vacate that conviction?
I think it just says as of 2024. After 2024. No, December 2022, basically.
Okay. So, but the offense would have occurred before then, but after December 31st, 2022, they could petition the court to vacate any prior convictions.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Any further questions of committee members concerning the constitutional amendment to legalize marijuana in Georgia? Senator Rhett, are you number 8?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Just a little clarification. I would assume that the Department of Revenue would determine how much money goes towards transportation infrastructure and education.
I think Bill right now is 50-50, please, saying half for the transportation and half for the education. If I'm correct, that's what it is.
Thank you.
Right now.
Other questions?
I have a quick.
All right. Senator Gooch.
Yes, already. Senator, are you suggesting that we allow citizens all over Georgia to smoke marijuana for recreational use? Would there be any restrictions?
What I'm saying
like
is,
corporations to ban it, still have drug testing at work? Would you allow bus drivers to smoke marijuana and drive a school bus the next morning, or what's your thoughts on that?
well, if somebody has, has a medical prescription, and they are allowed to go retail store and buy, then that particular person might be exempt. I mean, they're going to take a test, but it has to. The corporation has to decide whether based on if somebody's sick, and then they have a prescription, they can go and get certain amount of marijuana to use it for that particular purposes, and that would be the commission or will decide exactly what is the consequence will be. But they should be able to get it. That's the whole purpose.
So let's use the example of a school bus driver. If that bus driver had a prescription for the use of recreational marijuana, they would be legally allowed to use that marijuana and still drive a school bus?
Well, that's up to the school board, or the state has to decide. And I don't think that specifically this bill says anything about it.
So you don't have any regulations or rules on that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from board members? Senator Tippins, you're recognized.
Senator, how long do the hallucinatory effects of marijuana stay in the blood system?
I shouldn't have. I do not know that exactly.
Do you know how long after marijuana is used that it's detectable in the blood system?
I think it's 24 to 48 hours, I believe.
Do you know the test limits of acceptable marijuana limits in the blood to have a clean drug screen under the laws of Georgia?
I have to look at it.
I wish you would and report back to us.
Senator Rett first, you're recognized. All right, Senator Ginn, proceed.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. You know, I get to wear the badge I wear. Said mine says transportation on it today, so I'm always worried about what's going to impede our truck drivers and freight and logistics moving around the state. One of the things anybody with a commercial driver's license, or commonly referred to as a CDL, has to do a random drug screens. And one of the things that I'm hearing, and I apologize, I was listening on the monitor, said the outside, but when I look, that's going to be one of those things. Anybody that holds a CDL that takes part in marijuana is going to show up on a drug test, and they'll be put out of their work. One of the things that I look at that side of it, but the other one that concerns me is we have no, that I know of, any field sobriety test to see whether somebody is impaired or just they have it still in their system. And so for me, when you start looking at the insurance liability side of this stuff, because they're all going to, this will stay in your system for up to a month. Said and when you look, the problem is going to be, okay, did this person, were they just smoking dope and are they impaired, or was it 30 days ago and maybe they've got a remnant in their system? There's no field sobriety test like there is for alcohol. So how do you propose to deal with that from all of the drivers all over the state?
Well, Senator, I think all the state that legalize, I don't think those states has some drivers too. They're driving trucks and stuff. I don't think, most of the state that legalize, I'm not sure, those states doesn't, truck driver over there, they're not driving on the roads.
Well, even just the regular motorist out there, I'm concerned about what happens with them. And for me, I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question is other states, I know that there are states that are breaking the federal law and have quote legalized marijuana use in their state. For me, I'm concerned that how does an officer know whether you're impaired or not, and how are those states dealing with it?
Well, we have to look at the other state, how they're dealing with it, basically, We have to do the same thing they're doing at the other state.
Thank you.
Senator Rett,
I waive, sir.
you waive? Further questions? Okay. Well, while we have you, let's go ahead and talk about the other bill, 264. I think it's pretty concise, so if you'll tell us about Georgia. Let's see what you said. Controlled Substances Therapeutic Relief Act. This repeals the patient registry that we have now for the low THC oil.
So much stuff. Just give me a minute. What it does in 264 is this legislation would allow for a full medical marijuana program in Georgia patient would purchase up to 2 ounces of marijuana to keep up to 8 plants if they live in more than 120 20 miles away from the dispensary. It would allow 3 dispensaries can produce marijuana. It would allow at least 14 distribution centers with at least 1 each congressional district. So this is going to be spread out all around the state. School landlords, employer could not discriminate against cardholder based on the positive drug test, as so long the employee was not intoxicated at work, unless it would cause them to lose funds or licensing under the law, under the federal law. For medical care, including transplant, cardholder would be treated as same as non-cardholder. Possessing and using medical marijuana would not be ground for denying child custody or visitation, so long as there is no risk to the child. Medical marijuana would not be subject to taxation. This will allow, actually, I think that the bill that we passed in 2019, as far as I know we're still behind on that. So this will probably, help to expedite what's going on, right now, because we still have the THC. What we're going to do, the difference is, I think THC level, this one is going to go a little higher. Right now, it's like whatever the point we have, it's going to be a little higher on this particular one. And I hope that we do something for the folks that we needed, the bill that we passed for the purpose of the people who wants to get this THC in when this oil. These people, all the folks around the state still looking at us and trying to figure out what they can do, how to get this oil for for the children or for themselves, the family members they need to treat. We need to help these folks.
But this allows for up to 2 ounces of leafy marijuana in addition to oil.
This purchase up to 2 ounces of marijuana, basically.
All right, so that's the type you smoke, and you can have that in addition to these medical oil products, THC, low THC oil products.
That's correct.
Okay. And even if you are using these products, you cannot be denied child custody or limited in your visitation of your children.
Well, this is medical marijuana. If you have the license, or if you have permit to use it, then you cannot. Yeah.
All right, Senator Rhett?
No, sir.
Okay, other questions? All right, let's hear from some of the members of the public as to theirs. If you'll just stand by for us, Senator Rahman. I have several people signed up. We had a number of sheets. I'm going to call on Mr. Jeff Breedlove first. Georgia Council on Substance Abuse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jeff Breedlove. I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder. I also had the great privilege of sitting right over in that corner for 7 years as a member of your staff.
And a constituent.
And a constituent.
Tell us your
Using
thoughts.
the most diplomatic words I can, this bill is dangerous for the people of Georgia. I'm talking about Senate Bill 263 and SR 165 in particular. I'd like to begin with 2 particulars. I believe Senator Ginn did answer. It's up to 30 to 35 days that marijuana stays in a person's system. Also, to the issue of Colorado and to the suggestion that opioid usage and deaths have gone down in the state of Colorado, I point you to January 13th, 2022 from the Colorado Health Institute. Their headline, opioid overdose deaths up 54% in 2020, fentanyl fatalities spike. Any notion that marijuana does not lead or alleviates other is absurd. It's absurd. Any notion that marijuana is not a gateway drug is absurd. Now, I don't know if I'm the only person in this room that's ever done drugs, but I suspect I'm the only one that's going to come up to this podium today and say it's the case. I'm a subject matter expert in drugs. They almost killed me. And they almost killed about the other 800,000 people across the state of Georgia who are publicly in recovery from substance use disorder. And there are about 1.5 million Georgians right now, according to the federal government, who are probably in active addiction in Georgia. Now, whether it's the wisdom of the General Assembly or not to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes, that's not for me to say. But I will tell you what I think is perhaps the most egregious part of SB 263. Due respect, I staff the Transportation Committee and I sit in congestion just like everybody else. The notion that no money would go to support the Georgia recovery community, our providers, and our citizens groups that are struggling in your districts and in your cities to help people who cannot afford to get help is an insult to the people in recovery. Transportation doesn't need this money. The people who are in recovery and the people who are working to support the people in recovery need this money. Expert programs in schools to support children need this money. Now I'm going to do my best to keep this brief. But there are, first of all, I used to run campaigns. No campaign puts out a poll that it paid for if it's not good news. An industry report is invalid when we're talking about the health care of people of Georgia. We should not make decisions based off an industry report. We should make decisions based off independence reports from academic institutions. Those we like the University of Georgia, and those maybe we don't like the University of Alabama. But whatever those institutions are, we need independent reports that we get our facts and figures from, not industry reports. And I would strongly encourage every member to reject an industry-funded report. Children, young people in our state, I was in treatment with people of high school age. I'm sorry, and I'm sure this will come at a future date, but there are people in your communities, whether it's a 5-hour energy drink, marijuana, at some point that high, that buzz doesn't become enough, and they go to the next thing, and they go to the next thing, and they go to the next thing. Make the decisions you want to make, but please don't make it on the false presumption that marijuana does not directly lead some Georgians, some Americans, into active and traumatic substance use disorder and death, because it does happen. I'll conclude with this out of respect for time. 2 points. Before any, and I know this is a hearing only, but before any bills did pass, I can assure you there are thousands of Georgians who would strongly encourage an aggressive, transparent, statewide study committee that went into communities and heard from people. This will impact your local governments and their cost. It will impact the safety of first responders. It will impact your workforce. It will impact your schools, your athletic programs. This is not an economic bill and resolution. This is a holistic bill that's complex and serious, that impacts all segments of our society. And lastly, I would say this. Proceed with caution with the words you use when you're talking about substances that have killed more people than anything else in the state of Georgia. Dr. Kathleen Toomey has done 2 memos to Governor Kemp. The number 1 admissions to Georgia hospitals during COVID are overdoses. The CDC has issued a report that this past year was the first year in the history of the United States just on opioids where there were triple digits, over 100,000 people. People are dying from drugs every day, and marijuana and alcohol are at the very top of the list. This is more than the money you're going to get with that $1 billion. It's about what it's going to cost the state at the local level and at the state level. I'll end with this point, and if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. But I do believe the state uses its funds at talking about retail sales, and it uses law enforcement resources to deal with underage sales for tobacco and alcohol, two legal products. Don't kid yourself for 1 minute that in the future you won't be asked to appropriate taxpayer dollars to address the problem of those retailers who are selling to underage kids, and you're going to be doing ad campaigns and asking law enforcement to go in and address that issue if you do this dangerous, dangerous concept. I thank you for your time and available for any questions.
Jeff, any questions? I recognize Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one comment. I just want to thank you for being here. The perspective that you bring from your personal experience. I don't know if you speak about this publicly otherwise or not, but it's
all the time.
Okay, it's compelling, and I think it adds great value to the consideration and the work of this committee. And I just thank you for being here today.
Thank you. So the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse is your statewide recovery community organization. We are always at your service to represent the voice of people in recovery.
Other questions from committee members? Jeff, I'm particularly interested in this concept of marijuana being a gateway drug to these other substances. I have often considered that to be a truth without really hearing of any studies that have shown that. You seem to have, personal experience and obviously in that recovery area, but are you aware of studies that
yes, sir. There are
confirm
independent, and we can certainly get those for the chairman and the committee. But there are numerous studies, again, not industry funded and not activist funded, but academic studies that confirm that. I do want to be clear. So let's take alcohol for example. It's a legal product, right? Many people drink it, have no problem. Many people drink it, but they are functioning alcoholics. They never have a law enforcement encounter. They never harm another person. They don't lose their job over it or hurt their family over it. But the truth is they are functioning alcoholics, right? And it's a legal product. Then there's those people who have an encounter with law enforcement. Maybe they kill somebody with a DUI. They go to treatment. They lose their job. There's three types of big picture things that can happen in the real world to real people, and those are them. I'm not suggesting, and I don't think anybody with a straight face would, I'm sure some people smoke marijuana and go through life just fine. That's great. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of thousands and millions of people for whom this is a serious medical situation. And before anything is done to transformationally change the culture in our great state, it requires extremely serious study and thought, prayer, and consideration, because it will impact in a negative way millions of Georgians and their families and our workforce.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Appreciate you being
Thank you,
here.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Randy Robertson. Not a member of the committee, but as any citizen of the state is entitled to share testimony, you are most welcome.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Senator from the 5th. He and I came into the Senate together, and he's always been very supportive and a good friend. But to speak briefly, and I want to keep it just focused on marijuana, I don't want to get into the opiates and the other collateral damage caused by marijuana with other drugs. But I had the opportunity to visit the marijuana industry in Seattle, Washington, and spend about a week there looking at the grow houses and speaking to those involved in the retail industry and going to the stores and seeing the many, many products produced by the retail marijuana industry out there. And I did the same thing in Colorado. And in Colorado, I was invited to a dinner with a gentleman who was a world-class skier and had fallen down a ski slope and had gone through many procedures, and he was looking for that one substance that he felt would be the answer to all the pain he suffered. And so I met with him for dinner, and through the conversation, I realized that he was the individual that introduced medical marijuana legislation to the state of Colorado. and we had a great conversation. But the part that stuck with me the most was when he looked at me, and he knew I was a law enforcement officer and knew I was very much opposed to recreational marijuana and had some concerns with smokable medical marijuana. And he looked at me and he said, Randy, he said, you know, I get an opportunity to talk to a lot of people who support what I did. He said, but to be extremely frank with you, he said, the worst mistake I ever made was for them to allow them to add recreational marijuana to my original legislation. And he said, and the other part was, he said, my medical stuff got taken and expanded in places I didn't want it to go to. And he was being very frank with me, knowing that I opposed all of it at that time. I spent an evening in an apartment one night in Columbus, Georgia that did not have power, executing a search warrant on a man who was selling marijuana in Columbus, Georgia in Muskogee County. While in there, I started feeling a little odd, and I shined my flashlight on me, and I was covered with about 6,000 small, tiny cockroaches. And at that time, I was searching this gentleman's children's room. His 2 children were sleeping on coffee tables, and I was standing in dirty clothes almost up to my knees. And the reason I did that, not only was he an individual who sold marijuana, but he was an individual who's addicted to marijuana. The gentleman before me spoke of everybody wanting to move on to the next thing, and Mr. Chairman, you mentioned gateway drug. When you smoke the marijuana, the dopamine that's released in your brain the first time you smoke it is one of the most euphoric feelings you'll feel, I'm told. I've never actually smoked the stuff myself. But that's the only time you're going to get that euphoric feeling. The next time it's going to be a little less, and the next time it's going to be a little less. So you try to look for that next substance that's going to make you feel that way. And the marijuana we're dealing with today is not the ditchweed that grew in Harris County when I was a kid and the guys used to smoke in the smoking area at the high school. There's a very scientific process that goes into it. You go in a marijuana dispensary in Denver, Colorado, you're basically walking into an Apple store. It's one of the most high-tech operations you've ever seen. And as you go from table to table, you'll see different strains of marijuana with different THC levels. If you want a little THC to go home and relax, you can buy that. But if you want that much higher level of THC that puts you in a euphoric state where the next day you get to ask everybody what happened, then you can purchase that too. And the only thing that prevented me, if I wanted to buy it in Colorado at that time, was they asked me if I had a red card, and I asked them what that was, and it was a medical card that I got from my physician. And I asked them, I said, well, no, I showed them my Georgia driver's license. The owner told them I was a cop, which didn't bother them a whole lot. But they said, well, okay, if you're planning on buying any, you're only allowed to buy this much because you're not from the state of Colorado. So the only thing that prevented me from getting it was I just happened to be a resident of another state, and if I did buy any, I had to use it up before I left Colorado because I couldn't put it on the plane with me. But I say all that to say, even though I get the calls from the libertarians and everybody else who I support fully on most issues, marijuana is absolutely a devastating drug. The marijuana we're dealing with today is no different than any of the other drugs. And who suffer from it the most are those who become addicted to it and those who depend on those who become addicted to it, which are children in the state of Georgia. And to answer some of the questions, and Chairman Ginn was absolutely right, no trucking industry in the state of Colorado licensed a commercial truck driver that tests positive for marijuana. And they have a hard time hiring truck drivers. And marijuana stays in your system depending on if you're male or female, where the body fat's stored in your body for at least 30 days, so you're going to test. The State Chamber of Commerce in Washington State had to sue the state because the state wanted to do away with workplace drug testing that include panels for marijuana. And marijuana is read in nanograms, and it doesn't take a whole lot of marijuana to help you fail a drug test. He's absolutely right, Chairman Ginn is, about there are no tests to test impaired drivers in Georgia for marijuana with the exception of a blood test. And so you take a law enforcement officer off the street for an hour and a half or 2 hours based on personnel at the local hospital just to draw the blood and then wait for that. While I understand the senator's motives may be to float it out there and to see what happens, this is extremely dangerous. It is a terrible substance. And while I actually laud the chairman for holding this meeting. I think this is a great opportunity for us to finally pull the curtain back on marijuana, all the lies, all of the misinformation, all the commercialization that's been done to make this seem like a harmless drug. We can now see it's not. Each of us in the Senate that were here 2 years ago were given a small black hardback book, and it was about marijuana. And I encourage each one of you to read it and look at the psychosis that's caused and how many individuals starting out smoking marijuana and only using marijuana are now today on psychotropic medication because of the injuries to their brains and to their mental health caused by nothing else but marijuana. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for being here with us. Dr. Greg Raduca. We just have 2 more speakers, so if everybody just hang with us, we'll be done here shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today on this incredibly important topic. I'm Dr. Greg Raduca. My doctorate is in Human Development Institute for Child Study. I have a special interest in children and youth, and just want to start out by pointing out that currently there's no age minimum for 14 of the 16 conditions that are currently allowed. It's at 0, and I've heard testimony in some of these rooms from parents who are giving their babies, very young children, THC oil. So I would hope that in the future something that might be considered would be more age minimums, especially for those conditions that can affect children, not necessarily speaking about the epilepsy, but some of those other conditions. And I'll say more as to why I think that as I continue my testimony. But broad medical marijuana can easily become de facto recreational. So I'm speaking mainly to Bill 264. This is what happened in Colorado. This is what happened in California, where in California you could really get medical marijuana for a overgrown toenail. And the more we add to medical marijuana bills in Georgia, the more we're going down that slippery slope toward recreational. I began talking about the slippery slope in committee hearings in 2016. I was told I was not allowed to use that word at a meeting of the Non-Civil Judiciary Committee in the House. So I stopped using slippery slope for those hearings, but that was in 2015. Alan Peake, about a year and a half ago, spoke to a committee of the General Assembly and said that while you could make millions in medical marijuana, you could make billions in recreational marijuana. It's a long way from Haley's Hope. This Bill 264, as I read it, doesn't have any potency limits. So it would allow what's called dabs. And today's marijuana includes a lot of dabbing. If you go on a internet site, learn how to use an oil rig, which is a very elaborate bong for using dabs. Dabs are concentrates at 50%, kind of like crack is to cocaine. Well, in Florida, physicians are allowed to advertise, and a lot of physicians flock to Florida when they open the gateway to very, very broad medical marijuana. And what's happening there is that physicians are advertising medical shatter at 95% THC, and under a physician's recommendation, the fine print in the advertisement said, physician's recommendation, children would be allowed to take medical shatter. That's in Florida, 250 miles from here. So I sure hope that pieces of this bill are not taken by other legislators and adopted, because as has been said before me, it's a very slippery slope, and it's almost really like a cliff, because if you think you're going to stop getting the phone calls after marijuana gets legalized, if it ever does, I hope it doesn't, but we're talking about people from the Drug Policy Alliance, for example. Their executive director years ago, the playbook talks about revenue from global commodities like heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. He spoke about those drugs like global commodities like coffee, tea, and sugar, with the profit to be made. So it's not going to stop if we go with marijuana. Some states have already legalized psychedelics, so that's another piece we have to look at. Social justice, if you look at some of the minority arrest rates in states like Colorado, you're going to see that minority arrests have either stayed the same or gone up in Colorado since legalization. The black market is in very good shape in Colorado, so it really hasn't helped there as well. The tax revenue is about 1% of Colorado's budget. Driving on the highways was mentioned. I feel pretty certain that people are dying every week on Georgia's highways, or at least major traffic injuries. We have many times the population of Colorado, and in Colorado, there are an average of 3 deaths every day due to marijuana intoxication. There they have a per se law, which makes it much easier. I think it's 5 nanograms per milliliter. So it makes it much easier for them to measure. They haven't measured everybody, but of those they did measure for marijuana, you get an average of 1 death on their highways every 3 days. And that's not to talk about in-traffic injuries. Suicides. In Colorado, there are more suicides with positive toxicology results for marijuana than opioids. So Colorado is saying it's a bigger factor in suicides than opioids are. Pregnancy. There's very little that I've heard about that talks about the effects on pregnancy. And if you go to the Emory School of Medicine, Center for Maternal Substance Abuse, they will tell you that THC, marijuana, can cause stillbirth, can cause lower birth weight. Neonatal intensive care is called for in many cases where the expectant mother has been using marijuana. So there's just so many reasons why such a broad marijuana bill as 264 is just not a good idea for the health of Georgians.
Your group has tracked, this legislation in other states in the country. Is there a legislative pathway that you've seen, a pattern leading up to the legalization of recreational marijuana?
Absolutely. The playbook is, take it step by step. Don't necessarily rush it. Take it slow. And, we go from narrow medical marijuana, which is where we are now, to broader medical marijuana, to recreational, because that's where the real profit is.
I've got just a couple of other folks, and I want to give them a chance to speak. Thank you for being with us, and let's try to hold these comments just a couple of minutes. I have Taylor Hawkins. You're signed up on a couple of different bills, I think, so we'd like to hear from you. The press doesn't care to hear what you say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Taylor Hawkins. I am the Director of Advocacy for Frontline Policy Action. We are the largest pro-family policy organization in our great state, and we are here to oppose the legalization of recreational use and retail marijuana in our state. We represent a number of churches and thousands of Georgians in different communities of faith across the state, as well as a host of conservative business owners across this state. And our supporters wholeheartedly reject the policy of the legalization or expansion of marijuana use in Georgia, or the retail authorization for the purchase of recreational marijuana. We should not just look at the revenue generated by this measure, but also at the public health costs of this measure and the destructive and damaging effects on our communities and within our state. Legalizing marijuana, by the way, is opposed by most of, if not all, the major public health organizations in our country, some of which include the American Medical Association, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. The American Medical Association in particular, in one of their most recent studies, concluded, quote, "We believe that number one, cannabis is a dangerous drug and as such is a dramatic public health concern, and number two, the sale of cannabis should not be legalized." Legalized marijuana has been shown by many independent studies in different areas and states across this country that have legalized it to create steep and damaging costs for society and taxpayers that far outweigh any tax revenues collected. Some of those societal costs include increased emergency room visits, medical care and addiction treatment for the uninsured, dramatic increase in homelessness, and increased crime, including money laundering, gang-related activities, petty theft, and other crimes, which Senator Robertson also addressed earlier. Another issue would have a significant impact on hardworking Georgia employees and citizens, is the one Chairman Ginn brought up, of the issue of traffic safety. The lowest estimate I was able to get was that marijuana-related traffic deaths rose by over 62% following the legalization in marijuana in Colorado. Deaths, not just injuries, that's deaths. This is not only a safety issue for those who participate in recreational use, but also for the general public of our state. who will then be at significantly higher risk of injury and death for accidents caused by the use of recreational marijuana. Mr. Chairman, I'll openly admit that I am not an expert in the field of substance abuse or marijuana, but our organization strives to protect families in this state, and we believe that these issues and many others show that the decriminalization of recreational marijuana will have a dramatically negative impact on our state. And for these reasons, we would ask this committee not to consider these bills and would prevent the passage of these bills. I thank you for your time, Mr.
Thank you.
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Paul Smith. We'll wrap up here in just a couple minutes. Committee members, appreciate you all sticking with us. I can't wait to hear about your previous meeting.
I'll need a report on why you're late.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
My name is Paul Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Citizen Impact. We are a network of pastors, churches, and other Christian ministries throughout the state of Georgia. I had several things to share, but I've decided to truncate my comments because I don't think I can add to the compelling testimony that's already been given, and I'm trying to curry favor with Chairman Calsert and maybe even Chairman Mullis. So the only thing I'll add to this is the website of the Centers for Disease Control, who have a pages dedicated to the effect of marijuana, and I'm just going to read the list of the health effects. Each one of these, keep in mind, has a page dedicated to the topic: addiction, brain health, cancer, driving, heart health, lung health, mental health, pain, poisoning, which that was an interesting read for me, how children and pets get a hold of the edible marijuana and ingest it, pregnancy, the effect of secondhand marijuana smoke, effect on teens, and of course, as had already been said, a gateway to other drugs. So the Center for Disease Control is much more compelling than I could be in establishing this, and I would encourage you to look at their website on that. And that's all I have to add.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Last speaker, Mr. Mark Parnell, Georgia Faith and Freedom Coalition.
Good afternoon. My goal in my comments is to be even more brief than Mr. Smith. And my name is Mac Parnell. I'm the Executive Director for the Georgia Faith and Freedom Coalition. The Faith and Freedom Coalition is opposed to the legalization of recreational marijuana. Georgia is already the #1 state to do business with record-breaking tax revenue. We don't need to see that go up in smoke. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, we're going to adjourn for the day. Everybody have a great weekend. Be safe, be careful. We will meet again Tuesday, and we do have a number of speakers that have asked to be heard on the issue of electric vehicles and how to power them, how to get enough juice in them, energy or battery power to keep them on the road. So come prepared to learn about that interesting emerging industry. Yep.